with you a couple of years ago once I received some recommendations from some Hopewell members, folks that had been using you from a therapeutic point of view and had really great confidence in your ability to speak into certain situations and to encourage different behaviors and hopes from people. And we invited you then to come and speak with parents about the increase of anxiety that we were seeing in, especially in high schoolers at the time. So when we were talking about how this decision was going to impact students, you were the first person that I thought about and reached out to, because I really am concerned from my point of view as a pastor of the church, but also as a parent. How do we learn to anticipate some things that students might be going through so that we can be a little bit better mobilized to lean into those things with people when we see them, rather than being surprised that these things are happening. So that's really my interest in the discussion with you today, is really learning how to anticipate. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll kick it over to you, Jen, and you can just share a little bit about what you're doing.
Sure. I am in a newer position, just in the last couple of months made a transition. So I'm the director of lay ministry, and really working to engage the congregation in ministry and service, and find ways for them to use their gifts and to plug in and find places of connection, which I think right now is really, really important when we can't really gather as a large church. And so I'm looking for ways to support our children's ministry, our youth ministry, young adult ministry. How can I be a support to them as they're engaging some of their the families and kids, especially during this time?
Great. Allie, do you want to add?
Sure. I am Allie, and I'm our Director of Congregational Care, as well as a member of our children's ministry team. So as far as the congregational care team, we are looking at how to support parents or guardians best in this time of transition with virtual schooling, and with children's ministry, looking at how to best come alongside kids and a holistic view of family as the church at this point of view. So I'm looking forward to learning from you and your expertise better tools and better ways in order to support the whole of the family through this difficult transition.
Thank you. Good.
Sherry, do you want to add to what you were saying earlier about your interest?
Did you say me? I'm sorry. Yeah. So I have a couple of different avenues that I'm coming at this from. Definitely as a parent, my daughter, I have a daughter as a senior in high school. So her senior year started off very differently than she would want, for sure, missing all those fun senior moments. And also navigating how to apply to college when you cannot go to visit the college, all those kind of questions. And then I have a daughter that is a junior in college and went on campus in a very small campus in hopes that it would work out and they were able to stay. But unfortunately, last Friday, they de-densified the campus. They kept first years there, international students there, and then sent most of the other students home unless they had a really good reason to stay. So, we're living through that loss of what we had hoped would be her independence, and her, junior year is really fun. You really know the campus while you're really with your friends a lot. So she's going to miss all that. And then also from just my perspective as well, I lead a group called Rooted Table in Women's Ministry, where we have discussions on various topics. And this month we're talking about worry or anxiety. And, women, I think, manifest worry and anxiety a lot. So we'll be having several different conversations. I wanted to listen in on this one to see what you had to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first, the one thing I do want to say, what a wonderful community you're building, at this church, because folks really need support. And just, you know, the four of you talking about your areas of interest to do just that, whether it's a children's ministry, the women, the congregational support. And I think that's one of the biggest liabilities of this time is the loss of connection and isolation for our children, as well as those of us trying to hold it together for other people. And the ways that the losses, I mean, every one of you talked about loss right now. What's been lost in this time? And I think that we have to be able to talk about that and label that so that we, I hate to say normalize, but normalize that for now, this is where we are. Anytime, I mean, this is a trauma, you know, at many levels. And with trauma, if we don't label it and identify it, it has a way of seeping in ways that are not constructive. Now, that's not to say, and those of you that heard me talk about anxiety, I do think news coming in all the time, the children don't need to hear all of that stuff. There is a political scene that's happening now that has adults pretty anxious and upset. And it's another layer that the younger children don't even quite understand, but what they'll feel is that anxiety. So I think that as parents and as leaders, finding ways to get ourselves centered, I think is the first step. I mean, without, you know, as a therapist, without me being grounded and centered, I'm not going to be helpful to other people. And, you know, I talk with a lot of therapists and I supervise folks in the field, and even at that level being triggered by their own anxiety, how are they taking enough time? We talk about spacing time between appointments, because this is happening to all of us at many levels, right? So I want to say the first step is for the adults to take care of themselves in the ways that they need to. And the women's leadership group, the congregational support group, asking the adults in your congregation, before we talk about your children, what are you doing? Where are your connections? How are you avoiding the isolation? So I think that, you know, it's that age-old metaphor that if you're on a plane and the oxygen masks drop and you're with a child, you know, the parent puts the oxygen mask on first to make sure they're good, and then to the child. So I feel like that's one of our first steps for us to be clear about what are our losses, where is our anxiety, where is my connection in my community. Talking with adults, some really important relationships have been fractured through all of this too. And so there's been loss there, where differences of opinion have separated people from people they really cared about. And while we may not be able to mend that immediately, who can you rely on? You know, because I think for me, the greatest sadness, and I just got off a call with a client, you know, is the loss of relationships. That this is dividing us at a time where we need to really find common ground. And we do have common ground. You know, we have uncertainty right now. We have to learn, how do we deal with uncertainty? We have things that can go well in the midst of this too. And so we have to balance those losses with what benefits have come from this. What can we do with some of that? And how can we, I want to say, capitalize on the way we've had access to one another in the midst of this? It's uncertain. I can't tell you what it's going to look like 3 months, 6 months from now. And that's hard. So anyway, I said a lot, sorry.
Can I ask a question in response to that? I think you're absolutely right. We're witnessing lots of people sort of acting out their loss, right? And I think some folks may be a little bit unaware of how they're bringing that to a conversation or to the room. And they might not even have the words to describe that they're feeling that level of grief. But what are some indicators maybe that people could say, you could help to say, these are some signs of grief? And so in my estimation, loss and grief are dear cousins, right? And so, how does that manifest sometimes in people, so that if they don't have the language to say, I'm experiencing loss, they might be able to listen in and say, I'm experiencing those things, therefore I might be experiencing loss.
And so when you say, what do you see? Is it anger that you're seeing, or you said, they may act it out? What's the behavior on the top that?
Well, I think there are a lot of them, but I don't, and that's why I guess I'm asking you, what are some classic signs of grief that people could demonstrate that allows them to really name that?
Mm-hmm.
I can say, here's what I think, but I'm definitely deferring to you as the professional. I think anger is definitely at the top.
Mm-hmm. And so, and I want to talk about anger just in general, and it might be a helpful kind of idea. So what we think about anger is what we refer to as a secondary emotion. And so what that means is that anger is protective and it's a defender of probably more vulnerable emotions underneath. And so that's why sometimes you may find someone in deep sorrow and grief being angry, angry at a physician that missed something, angry at God, because how could God allow this to happen? And that the anger, is just coming out in lots of different ways. And just a simple thing to say, I hear your anger, I understand it. And what we know about anger is there's usually, once we peel that away, there's other things that are there, and they tend to be in a more vulnerable way: fear, sadness, rejection, and so actually giving the words, if that helps. Grief is interesting to me, and loss, because I think it can be expressed in ways that people were taught. You don't sit in sadness, you move forward, you look at the good, and grief is a process. And if we don't allow the process, it gets truncated, short-circuited, and that's where you see, I think, sometimes more of the maladaptive responses to it. And then it gets complicated and may, never resolve directly. I don't know if that's helpful to the, yeah.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I see too, and I agree with you, grief being a process, is that folks are resisting the time, right? So rather than learning how to navigate through it, just resisting it altogether and saying, I'm not doing this, I'm not participating in this, which is an interesting reaction to me to watch. But I think also somewhat wrapped up in that idea of loss, of not being able to feel like you have firm footing or something. So if I'm a parent who is aware of the lack of control that you were describing, the loss or sadness that comes for me personally, what do you suggest that people do so that they can process that away from their kids rather than in front of them?
So that's interesting, because I think some of it in front of them can be okay, so that, for instance, if a child comes to you and they're just dissolving into tears and I just can't look at the screen again, I'm tired, I miss my friends, I want to just go and play soccer on the field like I used to, and I don't want to see people with masks on anymore. I'm tired of that, And for you to take that in and just listen, I think the first step as parents is to just listen. Like, can we take the time to just sit and let them say everything? Because I think our tendency sometimes is to, oh, but look at this side, or but what about the, because it's hard when our kids are struggling, but sort of let them get the story out, those easy listening kinds of things that are just nodding your head, just be calm as they're telling you the story. And then I think it would be okay to say, well, I understand that, I don't understand what it's like to be 9, but now, I'm working differently. You see that I have to go online and have meetings, and I haven't seen my best friend you know, in a long time. And that's been hard for me. You remember, we would go walking every morning, and I can't do that now. And so it's okay to feel sad about that. And here's some things that help me feel better. And then we can use ourselves as an example that, and some examples can be, I remember when I did take walks with my friend. And sometimes when I'm feeling really worried, I'll sit outside and I'll imagine that I'm still taking a walk with my friend. Or, you know, so you give them some strategies that you yourself might use. It helps to breathe, and teaching them about taking breaths and imagining the good things. But we can't ask them to do that before they are allowed to express that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Is there a line at which sharing our experience, you know, is there a line that we should be concerned about? You know, how much of that is helpful to them versus then unhelpful for them to bear a burden that belongs to us?
So I ask parents to think about, how much do you feel like you have come to peace with certain parts of this? The parts that you're still angry about, sad about, feel like you're falling apart about, that's what has to happen off stage, if that makes sense. So I feel like if you're still really processing something and really struggling with it, that's our job to get that figured out, because a child will then take cues from us, right? So if we're heightened up here all the time, then they're going to feel heightened too. So, and I ask people, you know, it's a visceral response. We sort of know when stuff is still spinning. You know, you may feel heart rate, you may feel, you know, flushed in your face, you know when we're in that, I call it that dysregulated place. That they shouldn't see, because there's no hope in that. If mom and dad are falling apart, then what can I rely on? Does that make sense? So I feel like doing almost a body scan. What do I know I haven't? And then talk with your pastor, talk with a therapist, find ways to sort of resolve the uncertainty of these times, but to let children know that you can get through this. So places where you feel like you found strategies to show them that we can do this. Like, this doesn't have to destroy us. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Perfect sense. Yes. Yes. And I think that I appreciate so much that you're helping us to see that line, because I think that in a lot of ways people are unresolved and are sharing so much in order to try to put words around and give voice to the pain that they're feeling. And, you know, my concern is that a lot of that is very public right now. It's very public, and has a little bit of a ripple effect that I'm not sure we're aware of when we're sharing all of that. So I'm really glad for us to take the time and pause and say, where's the line, and what's resolved and what's unresolved, and then how do we make healthy decisions about how to invite kids into that conversation and how to be in their conversation as well. So I really appreciate that. I think we're watching a variety of different reactions, not just from parents, but from kids as well. What are some of the ways that you've seen younger folks be impacted, just in generally by COVID? You know, what have they been saying to you?
So in the beginning, I'm going to talk about in the beginning back in March, when it all shifted, and the change I've seen as they're heading into a new school year differently. So it was pretty novel in March, right? I'm home. I don't have to go to school. You know, I think that there was this idea that it was temporary. And so kids didn't struggle as much, I don't think, March, April. You know, summer hit, and that's where I think things started to get difficult, because everybody believed that this was going to be, our school year's ending early, and then summer vacation. And what does that mean? You know, that means camps, that means free time, it means being out, maybe favorite vacationing places, all those things. And when camps started to get canceled and kids were going online to do soccer camp, you know, when that started to happen, I began to see both depression and anxiety. And from our little ones to our teens, you know, our middle schoolers and our high schoolers. And so I really became more concerned as summer approached, because I think families had less support. The schools weren't even meeting. As difficult as it was, the teachers weren't trained yet, everything was much harder because we were just very quickly flipping to an online world. But somehow we didn't have much expectation, and we just got through it. That feeling in the beginning, it's like, we just have to get through it, but now it's how many months out, and to just get through it's gotten harder. And so I want parents to be looking for signs of depression and anxiety in our young ones, because now a new school year has started. And I do think that the schools are more equipped if they're doing the remote learning. There's been much more training. So some things are better, but none of it replaces in-school learning for our kids. It's not developmentally how we learn at these ages. So you may see anger, you may see tearfulness, but the thing I worry the most about is the isolation. My middle schoolers and my high schoolers are wanting to say, look, I'll just do my computer in my bedroom with the door shut. I'm not so worried that they're academically not doing their work. I'm worried that they're isolated, and so I want parents to be, it's hard because sometimes you've got 4 people trying to do something. People are working, 2 kids trying to do school, and I know it's hard, but the isolated person up in their room alone, I have some anxiety about. And how do we do check-ins, have snacks? What do we do so that they have some face-to-face if a parent can be home with them at that time?
Yeah, so I think of that's a concern for a lot of parents, that isolation and anxiety and depression. And so there's some hope that we'll move to in-person school so that doesn't increase. If it doesn't happen and we stay virtual, are there suggestions that you have for how to draw kids out of an isolated tendency?
So I think, we require kids to do certain things, right? And they have to brush their teeth before they go to bed. There's certain things that we know are good health. And I want parents to put time with family is in that category. That's as important as getting your teeth cleaned, as getting your checkups with your pediatrician. And so that if parents can, and I understand families are stressed too, because they may have been with kids who are synchronous all day, and now they've got to go finish their work for the day somewhere else. So I want to say, first and foremost, I understand there's only so many hours in a day. However, this has to move up on the list of priority of face-to-face contact with the children. And it might be, as I said, maybe it can't be dinner, but maybe it can be a lunchtime break, like really looking at these schedules and just getting that eye-to-eye contact. I think at night, when people are settling down, that even with our teens, I tell them they need to be downstairs for 20 minutes to a half hour. I don't care if you don't want to be a part of the movie or the conversation, but just the sense of that there are people around you. And then they can go back up. But I worry, I've heard from many parents that kids have been on their devices so much more this summer because that's how they connect with their friends. But the stuff that goes on those devices and the kind of things, it's not always uplifting and positive. So I'm asking parents to monitor and figure out how much social media is going on, and making sure that there's some face-to-face contact with adults, because I think that's gotten much harder for our kids too. And I don't know if you're hearing that from parents, but I know the thing they thought, I never in my wildest, life thought that my child would spend this much time on their device. But what am I supposed to do? That's how they're contacting their friends now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what we've been hearing just over the last couple weeks since school started, mostly in late August for the majority of our kids, is that they're already having that kind of exasperated screen time, melting down, crying, having tantrums. And I'm not talking about little kids, right? This is teenagers as well. And so I think in that moment when all of that is happening, and and we expect maybe that they're not going to have tantrums because they're older, we forget maybe that tantrums are a sign of something else that's going on, right? So from your point of view, what kind of needs do those behaviors indicate?
You know, so many things go through my mind because it can be different for different children, what might be happening. But I think for some children, their self-esteem about their ability to be good learners is impacted by the online process. That depending on how they learn, that clicking on and trying to focus on an instructor and take notes and do those things, I think that there can be frustration and thoughts about themselves that are negative. I'm not a good student. I'm not smart. Like, we want to figure out what's underneath that once that happens. So that would be one of the things. Some children are very shy, and to be put on the spot on a screen to respond is very hard for them. In a classroom, they might be in a small group and they might be willing to say something in that way. So we've removed a lot of the devices that we have in room. So I don't know, it might be something to that effect, that everybody's supposed to make a comment and they feel like all eyes are on me. I don't want you to look at me, you know? And so I think for parents to, when they're calm, to say, what was it at that moment that just made you not want to be on that screen anymore? What got so hard for you? And, you know, see what it is, because I think it's different things for different children. And the other thing I find hard is that, and I don't know what your parents are experiencing, but some students aren't getting live teachers talking to them. Some are clicking hyperlinks and, you know, watching videos and doing those things. And I would encourage them to ask that there is some live with the teacher, because they need that engagement, I think, to see the teacher live talking them through. I'm not saying that they won't click them on to something or assignment to do or a small group or whatever, but they need people talking to them, I think. So I'm not sure what the different schools are doing, and maybe it changes teacher to teacher, but there needs to be some, I think, live communication. The synchronous, as hard as it might be, now some go too long, I think, you know, they just expect they're going to be on for 60 minutes straight, and that kids can't do that. They can't do that in the classroom. You know, we switch it up. We show a little bit of a film, they do this or that, but that connection, I think, is really key.
Yeah, and I think there's something now that I'm hearing described as like Zoom exhaustion, right? Where, I mean, just mentally and emotionally, people are exhausted the more they have to participate in virtual meetings or classrooms too. That I think it requires a different level of attention even, and vulnerability to be seen and know that everything that you're doing, somebody can watch. So I think that's something too that we're starting to see, and maybe we'll see a little bit more of as students go a little bit longer with distance learning. Are there other things that you anticipate? You said in the beginning, it was like, let's get through this, and then we see a little bit of rise in anxiety or depression. Are there other things that you anticipate, any other needs or behaviors that you won't be surprised to see?
Withdrawal, I think, you know, comes up for me, that parents need to be looking at how much are they withdrawing from other activities now. They used to love to fill in the blank, and you can't get them interested. And the exhaustion is exactly right, whether it's the Zoom exhaustion or the exhaustion of living in this remote time. How do we typically recharge? You know, you go outside, play with a friend, you can feel better and come back to your work. But I think it's more limited what children can do now. And so when they start to withdraw from activities that they typically enjoyed, I think we need to be paying attention to that. I don't know in your community if there's been some development of certain families that sort of are are social distancing together and having some real time outdoors. I don't know what you're seeing that parents are trying, because with the weather extending, and I'm saying to families, if you're outside, we can take advantage of this good weather. And I do think being in nature, outside, safe distance, however they're comfortable. Do you know if families are doing that?
Well, I think so, but I think this would be a good point to also open it up to other people to contribute to that. What are you all seeing? How are people managing the outdoors and social distancing?
Well, I have high schooler, so it's a little bit different. She's not like going outside all the time, but she does have a group of friends that she gets together with, once or so a week. And so they are, doing things together to try and normalize the situation as best they can. But I just, from like my neighborhood, I can tell that the kids in my neighborhood are playing together, so, and they're younger than my kids. So I'm assuming that the parents have made some kind of agreement as far as the kids stay outside or they don't come in or whatever. But I do see kids definitely playing together within our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sherry, I've heard that too, of different neighborhood communities of the kids having some sort of exchange with each other, and maybe more so than even before this time. Those who live closer to in proximity are meeting in the middle and spending time outside in that fashion. In some families, it does seem like they have maybe 3 families who are seeing each other. Maybe they don't live close, but they're distancing sort of together, as in the fact that they come and they have community every week. But I think it just is different for each family and what each family is comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. Another example, my high school daughter got together with friends last Friday night and they slept out in a tent. So they had a sleepover, which, is very typical for high school students or whatever, but you kind of have to figure out how to do that in this world. And I thought that was a pretty ingenious idea, put up a tent in the backyard and sleep out there. So I think that went well.
We had a group of kids at church earlier in August for an event. Maybe, Allie, were there 30, 40 kids maybe? The first really big event since March. And I was hearing some parents say, my kid is so excited about this, or my kid is just really, this is the first thing that they've been able to do with their friends. They're so excited all summer and have not been able to see them. And I was watching the reactions of the kids, just some of them couldn't stop talking to each other because they hadn't seen each other for a while. So some of that, I think parents were experimenting, how's this go? But the kids were really excited to be together.
Because what I'm trying to promote is that social and emotional health is important too. The public health risk, I tell parents, refer to your physicians around that, talk with them about what they're recommending. That's the public health piece of it. But the social emotional needs of children, we have to figure out safely how to make sure that part is also being addressed. And so having a way to gather that parents and children are comfortable with, that they can see each other and talk, I just feel like we cannot ignore social. We can't put that on hold for another 6 months. We need to keep working ways of that. I think it's really been hard for children because some families are doing one thing, their family's doing something different. And that is where I'm seeing meltdowns with kids, seeing things on social media, maybe people participating in a particular way that they're not allowed as a family. And I'm dealing with parents who are trying to figure out how do they, without judgment, just sort of explain what they think they need to do in their family right now. And I think that's been really hard, because some young people are really feeling isolated because they're not allowed to do certain things. And I tell parents it's just got to be a day-to-day proposition there, and just to keep the communication open, that if you have certain reasons, you know, it may be that there's a sibling that has some immune compromised situation or some kind of respiratory issue, so the family may need to be practicing things a little more stringently than another family, and you can let them know that I know that that feels really unfair, and it is, but it's the way we have to be. So having a certainty about what you decide in your family, trying not to judge what other families are doing, and then allowing the child to feel the loss of that, if that makes sense. But I think I've seen kids really struggle with what some families are allowing and what some families aren't allowing. And that's a tough one to explain, you know, sometimes. But,
Yeah, we see that too. We have had to kind of shift and adjust based on who my daughter wants to see. What have they been doing, you know, and there were certain invitations that she received from other teenagers who weren't distancing at all, right? And we had to say, you can do this, but not this. And I think that especially given the fact that there was some reentry into school with sports for some kids, you know, just being able to discern in the moment, where are we and how are we moving through this, and then to be able to share that information and hear the reaction, right? Which is sometimes disappointment, right? I think that's important, to be able to keep discussing it and to see if there's any movement based on what is the higher need in the moment, right? For her, working was a really help, and obviously she's older. My youngest daughter is 17. So for her, working was really helpful, having something that got her out of the house, but didn't put her in a group of other teenagers who were not practicing any precaution, right? So like, where were we able to give her something she needed, some kind of socialization, but we know that when she's there, she has to practice certain precautions in order to be there. So kind of finding some middle ground too, for her to be able to articulate what her needs are, and for us to be able to say what ours are as well.
and I think that point though that you're making is where I see some of the stress for parents, because you bear the burden of making the decisions for your family, and the responsibility is so great. You know, it's not like, here's what we're all doing and this is how it gets done, but because of the way things have happened, each of you are feeling this incredible responsibility to get it right. And it's a lot. I mean, if I could say the repeating theme for the parents that I talk to, that's the burden they carry, you know. And I that's another place where it just breaks my heart that that's kind of where it is, you know. That's always true at a certain level, but it's so heightened now, you know. And questioning yourself. There isn't one parent out there that says, you know, oh, I feel 100% confident that this is what I should be doing. You know, you take these risks, you look at the benefit and you look at the risk, and you try to do the best that you can. And that's another piece, I guess, that ties in with the children, to make sure that if you agree to something, as the parent, you take full responsibility that was your agreement. Because I've had some situations where kids just pushed and pushed and pushed for something, and then they got it, and then there was a scare, and now the child feels responsible. And these parents were able to say, no, that wasn't your job to make the decision. We made the decision. You were a kid and you pushed for something you wanted, but we decided, you know, so that they don't bear the burden, because kids can take responsibility like, well, this is my fault. And if a parent in a more vulnerable moment says something like that, you know, we have to really make sure we're comfortable, so that the child doesn't bear the burden of that. Does that make sense? I think that it's you know, I had a situation where the child really felt like that was their fault. You know, and the parent was able to say, absolutely not, you know, we will not make decisions. We hear you, and sometimes we'll say yes, and sometimes we'll say no. Yeah.
Do any of you have questions that would be helpful for the roles that you have, for the things that you're doing, and the ways that you're supporting other people? Well, go ahead, Sherry.
I was just going to say, you mentioned earlier something about strategies, and I assume you meant strategies of how to get through this, I guess. So could you maybe mention some strategies for different aged children and for parents, as well as, you know, what we can do to help our kids through this?
So when you say strategies, tell me, what are you thinking about?
Well, I think some of the things that you said, like making sure that they don't stay in their room the whole time, kind of things like that, just little ideas to try out that might help, you know, keep everyone mentally well.
Yeah, so I think that in the course of a week, you know, there's some things to make sure happen. I think physical is important in some way. They don't have to be a sporty child, but I do think there needs to be physical activity. I think that's important. I think there needs to be time, and I mean when parents have time, so it doesn't have to be every day, where there's a check-in, like, how are you doing? What has gone well today? Because the other piece that I feel like we have to, as the adults, weave hope in, that we know that eventually this is going to be okay. There's going to come a time where it's going to feel like a memory and not what we're living. And so we want to ask them, you know, what's gone well today? What surprised you? You know, oh, I was so worried about the math class, but it turns out that they were able to use a whiteboard and I could figure out the math, you know, so what went well? And then what's really hard right now? So the balance there. I think that children need to think that they're contributing to something getting better around this, you know, that we're participating somehow. And, you know, I don't know there can be lots of different things, whether they contribute to a foundation that's helping kids who can't go, you know, so this idea of acting outside of myself and contributing to the greater good, you know, something like that, that says there's hope and I am making a contribution. I can't change what we're doing right now, but I can change something for the future. And, you know, it's corny maybe, but I think acts of kindness, you know, what's one nice thing you did today? What's one nice thing that happened to you? And so that we're balancing and showing a balance in those pieces. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's just some ideas. And if there's almost a list for parents to think like, have we hit these marks through the week? You know, but I think that the loss of hope is really what we have to fight really hard against right now. You know, as adults, you know, there's a lot of darkness being pushed our way, you know, and we have to push that back, and we have to help our kids see the rays of light where they are. Stories about things that people have done that have been, you know, there's always, you have to look a little harder, but there's news stories of creative things that different communities have done, you know, these different acts of kindness. You know, every time I hear about someone's, well, you know, my employer continued to pay me even though I haven't been able to be there. Knowing even in these small businesses where the business owners are really taking care of the people that are working for them, like to be reminded of the kindness. So they're just some ideas. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah.
That's good to hear. We've been sort of trying to feel our way through how are people's needs shifting, and how do we as a church make that shift with people. not just in what we plan, but also in what we talk about in worship and so forth. And I'm just really glad to hear you say that we're about to have a conversation about what are we learning and what's important, and the things that we're highlighting, having a lot of grace, right? I mean, having a lot of hope and looking for ways to really demonstrate and embrace love. I think, so hearing you say those things makes me feel very confident that we are moving in the right direction in our conversation, because it is like feeling your way through the dark, and it's hard to pick themes and activities, and that's what they're doing, that really hit the mass, right? Because people are in different places, but it seems like pretty generally we're planning the way that you're to hit the kinds of things that you're describing as important. So I think that's good news. Good to hear. Good to hear.
I know that, you know, studies have been done more on teenagers and depression, and teenagers who struggle with depression that also are engaged in giving back, being the leaders in contributing to the better, really does help their sense of self, and it does help with the depression. So acting outside of ourselves. Now, we don't feel like it when we're feeling depressed, but if we can put opportunities ahead for kids, I think that they just naturally feel better when they feel like they've helped someone else. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it allows them perhaps to feel like there's some meaning, some purpose to what is happening when everything else feels in some ways purposeless, right? That they don't understand why anything is happening, and just feel the effect of it. So what's interesting to me about what you're saying is something that we haven't done is given the freedom for other people to choose what giving back looks like, right? We've made decisions that say, here are opportunities to give back, but we haven't really polled and said, what would be meaningful?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm making a mental note of, will people respond? Do they know right now what's meaningful? You know, because I also think that the more we try to communicate with people, the more we find they are so exhausted by the number of emails and phone calls and things that they have to pay attention to, that it's really just hard for people to keep up with things that are going on. Do y'all have any other questions?
I'm just thinking from an adult perspective. I know this is mostly about kids, but just given the divisiveness of our country right now over several different issues, and having teenagers, again, you know, they talk a lot about different things, and, you know, friends that have different opinions, and how do you suggest you just process all that and still love one another with difference of opinions on things?
This is a hard one, and again, it was just a conversation this morning. And at the end of the day, I think, and you're in a church community, so you're going to be hopefully even more open to hearing this, but everyone deserves respect. Everyone deserves to have opinions, however different from yours. But at the end of the day, if we don't show love and respect for one another, what's going to become of us? And what I say is that this is a moment in time. We cannot let these differences destroy us. I mean, at the end of the day, connection, relationships, and if you're in a family situation where there's polar opposite opinions, you know, I encourage families to say, can you just say, let's agree to disagree and share what we do have in common, and not get into these debates anymore. You know, you're very clear on what each other believes, and I can respect the difference. And can we now focus on those things that do bring us close? because I think that what I've seen is it's just snapped some relationships completely. And it's hard because I do think it's promoted. I mean, the news, everything is just really promoting this polarization. And we know better than that, right? The condition is not about that. The human condition is about attachment, connection, lack of isolation. And there used to be a time where you could have a difference of opinion and still walk side by side. And I'm encouraging folks to stay off the media. I'm hearing horrific stories about adults and what's happening on social media. It's destructive. I think people are behaving in ways they've never behaved before. And I sort of say, pull away from that, you know, look your friend in the eye, talk about what you have in common. It's really taken on a life of its own now, I think. So I don't know if that's helpful. That's, you know, we're not, for lack of information, there's nothing I can say about what I think to another person who has their list of things. There's, you know, I have nothing to offer there. They're going to believe what they believe, and can I share what I really care about with them? A memory, a time, what we do have in common, and not let our differences separate us. Because that's the problem, right? Differences are separating now. And differences didn't have to separate us, you know? Hard.
Yeah, that's an important question. I think, especially because even some of the concern that we have around COVID and school and so forth, all of that is becoming politicized as well. It's kind of like all of it is swept up into this big ball. You either believe this or you believe this. And if you believe this, you must be this. And if, you know, I mean, and it's just that we're sort of in this habit of being divisive and degrading even, that, yeah, we can't listen even anymore. So I appreciate your encouragement and looking for a change. But knowing that that I'm responsible to bring that change wherever I go if I'm looking for it, right? So I'm hopeful that others will have that kind of commitment also. We're looking for ways, and I think our ministry teams have been really creative to address some of the things that you've been describing, the loss of connection and isolation and the difference in precaution and so forth by trying to take some of our plans to their homes and allow families to engage them as they are comfortable. I think that's pretty, that's also encouraging because we realize that the longer this goes on, the greater risk we have of also becoming disconnected with families. And we want to present ourselves as a source of connection, not to become a part of that lost story. So I'm just really excited about the ways that that we might be able to provide that kind of support going forward. Not to say or approve of one strategy or another, but to just present ourselves as present and loving and available for folks as they navigate through this. So it's been a real help and a blessing to talk with you. I don't know if anyone else has additional questions. I'm certain that tomorrow our conversation will sound even different based on who's participating and the kinds of concerns and questions that they're bringing to the discussion. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise with us. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow and really to implementing as best we can some of the encouragement that you gave us today.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for the opportunity. And it's just so, it gives me hope when I see a community like yours really wanting to listen and figure out how to help families through what we've never been through before. So I appreciate that. That gives me hope. And And the other thing I want to say is after our discussion today, if any of you have more questions that you think would be helpful for me to be thinking about for tomorrow night, if you anticipate maybe more parents are going to be there, like, you know, let Amy know, and then you can just say, hey, Priscilla, here's some other things if you want to be thinking about for tomorrow night, you know, just from our discussion here. I'm so open to however I can be of help. So thank you.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.